Hey everybody, it's Ross from the Otherworld Original Dungeons and Dragons Clubhouse, and also the other clubhouse that we kind of do, Mythic Mountains, because this is a collaboration video. You'll see that they're both mentioned down in the video description, but this applies to both clubhouses. This is a conversation with Steven, aka Purple Druid. Now, Purple Druid is one of the coolest Dungeons and Dragons archaeologists right now that I know on the internet. It is a gem, the stuff that he's making. But he primarily focuses on wargaming, fantasy adventure wargaming. Now, of course, if you're in the Otherworld Clubhouse or the Outlaw Void Clubhouse, you already know how this goes. But what I want to say is, if you are an old school Renaissance gamer, if you play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, 5.5, Pathfinder, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Castles and Crusades, whatever you play, you should be playing a war game also. Hark, each and all of us that play role-playing games, if you play it in the campaign mode, where it's an entirely open world and you're simulating a secondary world, it should have a war game component. And this is not hard to do at all. And more on this later, but if you check out this book by John McGowan, The Living Campaign, you'll find that to have a living world, you must have the possibility of mass combat. Don't have a great mass combat that interlocks with the system? Here you go right here, Hell March, Volume 1. Very easy. D20 system interlocks perfectly with games like Shadowdark, Pathfinder, 5th edition, Old School Essentials. You name it, extremely simple. And I gotta say, for years, I've preferred good old chainmail. Chainmail, you throw a bunch of D6s. Hey, this side threw D6s, they kill on a 6. This side, they kill on a 5. Oh, look, 4 died over here, 6 died over here. It is so simple. But why do I say this? Why is it that I think everyone that plays role-playing games, if they do it in a campaign mode where they're actually simulating a world, should have a war game layer to their campaign? Well, that's what I hope to answer in this video. I hope you enjoy.
Little sip of coffee for the working man.
Like Todd. All right, everybody. I'm Ross from Mythic Mountains Folk Clubhouse, and this is a Clubhouse chat. Mythic Mountains, we focus on folk, tabletop games, war games, card games, role-playing games. Today I'm joined with Steven Purple Druid, who has a blog called Wargame Culture Design Journal on Substack, and also has a YouTube channel called Purple Druid Presents Wargame Culture. The channel is about using wargaming, which is what I definitely am interested to talk to you about, and then also the history of wargaming and these types of games and map games, and then also the vintage, the antique, like looking into older games and things like that. Steven, welcome. Thanks a lot for being willing to talk to me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This is always fun. I like to talk to new people about, in a face-to-face, as it were, situation. So this is always good for me too. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. I've been looking over your YouTube channel and stuff and kind of following your journey, and I think one of the main reasons I want to actually talk to you and then broadcast that is, as you know, you're one of the ones we've selected to sort of, I don't know what to call it. It's not umpire, but sort of like, we had those in the military. I think we just called them observers, like the people that would come through and they would take notes and they would add to the after action report and stuff. And you're one of 3 people that is part of our war game right now that can observe it. You can look into any part of it that's going on, and and you have history with like how did we get here? And this is sort of a big question that a lot of us are crossing this bridge now. And I know it's not exactly new, but I think this has really started happening in the past few years. Is this a war game? Should it ever have not been a war game? How did it make this transition? Should we even go back, and to what extent? What parts should we take back from when this was pre 1974 proto to the adventure game, and what parts do we add? And so you've already walked through that. And so what I imagine that the chat could be useful for is for people like me who I've been doing Dungeons and Dragons or some sort of adventure game or role playing game for years now. But now I'm starting to see, oh wow, when I have this overarching map with components that are in opposition, it provides a lot of the context that makes Dungeons and Dragons work and greases the wheels. So I suppose let's start with that. Um, uh,
The answer is yes.
the, the answer is yes. Were you? Did you start as a role player or a war gamer or all of the above? And where did you step in and out of those doors, or do those doors even exist? I guess that's a starting point.
I think there are doors, and I used to believe that wargaming and role playing were separate things. I got into the Dungeons and Dragons hobby in 1982, the summer after sixth grade. Some of my classmates, their older brothers, were going off to college, and they had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a couple years amongst themselves. Us little guys weren't invited. But when they were going to go away, they bequeathed all of their D&D materials to to the next generation. And so uh, we got together, all us sixth graders, and they ran a couple of adventure sessions for us, 2 or 3 sessions, so that we could learn how to play Holmes basic Dungeons and Dragons. That was what they had, was Holmes. And they had a bunch of old modules, and so we dove straight into it, and we were making up characters, first level, fifth level, 10th level, whatever, the things kids do. And then we got a little bit more serious, and as we read through the Holmes basic rule book, it kept making these mentions of advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was forthcoming. So we went to the bookstore and looked, and lo and behold, there it was, the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. And so we had to mow a few extra lawns and what have you to get that money. But we bought those books, and so we played kind of a mishmash of Holmes and first edition AD&D all through middle school and high school. And then I went off to college, and my friends in college weren't really into the D&D part, but I was also familiar with, Champions and Cyberpunk and a lot of those others. So we played a lot of Champions and Cyberpunk 2020 when I was in college. And then after college, I went back home and got in with another group, and we played Dungeon Advanced D&D, and I threw in the combat system from Rollmaster because we wanted to try something a little crunchier. And then in about 92, I believe, was when Dangerous Journeys came out, and I started a campaign with some other friends in Dangerous Journeys. And I also started to get into miniatures at that time, Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And then a few years later, in 95, I moved to New Orleans. And I left most of my notebooks and what have you of the campaign information for the D&D campaign with my friend who was going to take over as Dungeon Master. And I really regret that now. I wish I had, it was a big box, stack of papers, dungeons and notes and what have you. And I have no idea where that information is now. I would love to have it so much. But I moved to New Orleans and fell in with a bunch of miniatures gamers. And I basically just got away from the role-playing part and just played miniatures for about 20 years.
When you say
Uh,
miniatures, you mean any game kind of like that, just in general,
yeah,
like
I mean, Warhammer
Warhammer, yeah,
Fantasy,
Warhammer
Warhammer
Fantasy.
40K. It was mostly Games Workshop at the beginning, but then later we started to get into alternate rule systems, Stargrunt, Dirt Side 2, Full Thrust. Um, I played a lot of Axis and Allies, different versions of Risk. As time went on, um, it is, and I think it's true what they say that younger people play fantasy and science fiction games, and then older guys get into the historicals. Because I didn't get into the historicals until about 5 years ago, and that's when I started playing Black Powder, um, Chainmail. I mean, a lot of the other older games that I've been experimenting with. In fact, I've I've played all three of these in this book, which I don't know if you can see this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, John Tunstall, Arthur Taylor, and Bill Lamming. I've played all of their rules, and I'll leave this down here. We're going to come back to this. Um, and I've been playing a lot of different games, especially in the last few years, as I've really been diving into the history of the intersection of role playing games and war games. And honestly, I'll say it started with wanting to figure out the best way to run a war game campaign, a map-based campaign based on Tony Bath's idea for his Hyborian campaign. And I had read a bunch of great rules in different books, the Solo Wargaming Guide, uh, gosh, some of the other John Curry History of Wargaming books, and I started trying to pull them together and compile them. And then I found out that Henry Hyde was actually doing the same exact thing, and he'd been working on it for 7 years, and that his book, Wargaming
Wargaming
Campaign,
campaigns, yeah.
was about to come out. And so I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I will put that project on pause and wait for this." And sure enough, this is basically what I wanted to do, but it's also hundreds and hundreds of pages rather than just 30 or so that I was trying to cobble together. And
Yeah.
it's much smarter than what I could have done. So I have that.
And when
And
did that happen? So you're talking about kind of like, okay, so let me
this
divvy
is in the
this up.
last
So
this is in the last 3 or 4 years
early
that I've really
90s,
been
you kind of up to that point you had been playing role playing games, and then you moved somewhere, and then
right.
where you were at, people were playing miniature war games,
Correct.
or war games with miniatures like Warhammer, and then now we talked before we started recording. Now you're talking about the COVID era, right? Like COVID happens
Right.
now. Now
Post COVID.
it
Post
kills
COVID
the
I
and my
yeah.
friend Jake, the co-host for this, went through this where he was on an X-Wing podcast. He was he was into X-Wing tournaments, and he liked miniatures with
Mhm.
primarily skirmish games and stuff, but whatever. But COVID killed that culture, just utterly devastated it, because it was all about going to the game store,
Right.
and then when that died, then he made the switch to D&D. So you're talking about now that's happened, and now you're um
Right.
uh
And even a couple years before that, I was kind of following my wife around for her work, and we were in Maryland, and I was working for a restaurant, and I was very busy with that. She was working at a hotel and very busy with that. So I wasn't really playing anything, but my hobby was more or less just painting miniatures, making scenery. And I started a solo campaign using Pulp Alley rules for a kind of
okay, so
Tales of the
you
Monkey
became
style.
interested in vintage gaming before COVID. Vintage
Right.
wargaming. Okay. Okay.
Well, I became interested in solo gaming before COVID,
Okay.
just because by necessity, I didn't have time, or the time I did have, no one else was available, and so I started playing some solo games by myself. Obviously, with using the Pulp Alley rules, which is a skirmish game that's
Jake loves Pulp Alley. That's like one of his favorites.
it's right on the border between a role playing game and a
Yeah,
skirmish
that's what he
game.
says. Yeah, he loves it.
Um, Personally, I'm of the opinion that the skirmish war game, there's no hard line between skirmish wargaming and role playing.
I've heard the
Yeah.
argument that 5th edition is merely a skirmish game that people use funny voices with.
Yeah.
So we
Um,
certainly did a lot of that. So, okay, so to kind of
so
like,
anyway, so COVID comes
oh,
along, I can't play anymore, and I went online looking for something to do, some kind of people to play games with, online games or whatever, and I found the online Dungeons and Dragons community. And so I started looking for, is anybody still playing AD&D? Because I didn't really understand that a lot of the new stuff that they were talking about. And so I discovered all the old OSR blogs and a lot of these old forums, and it was fascinating to me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start an online game because I heard about Discord, and I joined a 5e game very briefly. That wasn't, it just wasn't a good fit for me. Um, but that taught me how to use Discord to play a game. And excuse me. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to run an AD&D game. Playing, still have my old Greyhawk stuff from back in the day. But I had just finished rereading Fred Saberhagen's Empire of the East trilogy. And so I wanted a magic system more like that, which is really uh, different from the standard Dungeons and Dragons system. And so I made a customized magic system, and then I put word out in different places, Twitter and Discord, different Discords that I was in. If anybody's interested, I'm going to run a campaign. And then I had the inspiration that perhaps I should run not Dungeons and Dragons in order to really get the most out of this magic system.
okay,
And so I wanted to find something that was as low fantasy as possible. And there just happens to be a game called Low Fantasy Gaming
right.
uh, by Stephen Grodnicki. And the rules are free. The basic PDF is free. It used to be that the basic core system was at cost, available at cost on Lulu. So I ordered that. And what I wanted to do was bring in some people to try out this new magic system, but shock them out of the idea of D&D.
Mm-hmm.
So different gaming system, custom world, custom magic system. And I had about 8 players, whittled that down to 5 or 6. And 2 of them are actually still playing with me 5 years later. Um, but we ran that game for about 3 years, and it was supposed to
And you
just
did
be,
this online
we did this
post-COVID.
online
Okay,
on Discord, and it was supposed to really just be a play test for maybe 6 months to a year of the magic system. But everyone liked it so much that it turned into a full-scale campaign, and it ran for 3 years. The next chapter was when Secrets of Tanisborg came out, or Lost Dungeon of Tanisborg, I'm
now
sorry.
I know what you're talking about. Okay, but let's
Yes,
pause there and
yes.
give like the paragraph version of what's going on with that bunch. Like what? Yeah, go ahead. Like
Earliest days of
Tonisborg,
that would
etc.
be
Yeah.
in the 71, 72 era when Dave Arneson was running a game called Blackmore. One of his friends put together a dungeon called Tanisborg that he ran. It was 10 or 10 levels, and fully keyed out in a shorthand form. Well, he loaned that notebook, that stack of papers, to a friend who made a photocopy. And then the friend accidentally, the originals got thrown away. But the photocopy got stuck in a box, and someone moved, and they finally found it 40 years later.
Right.
And so the Fellowship of the Thing and everyone's good friend Griff Morgan published it in paperback. They did a Kickstarter for it, or some sort of, yeah, I don't think it was a Kickstarter. And I really wanted to get my hands on this because there's a lot of these old documents that aren't available to everyone. There are collectors and historians and history book writers that are sitting on these original documents and not sharing them with the community. But that's another story altogether. Um, so I got Tanisborg, and I had put out on Twitter, when Tanisborg comes out, I will run a Mega Dungeon campaign for anybody who's interested. Well, I had 10 or 11 people interested.
Yeah.
And so, in order to accommodate them all, I started doing 2 sessions a week, one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. And in order to facilitate that, because it was going to be just one world, we had to use 1-1 pacing, and we matched the game calendar to the real world calendar. I also went ahead and threw in the patron concept, where I had people that weren't session players, people who were outside the game, take on the roles of different NPCs within the campaign world. And I also set up a monthly and weekly turn structure for those patron players so that they wouldn't overload me with orders and commentary and such. So every group, all 3 groups, I should say, the Tuesday group had to get their orders for downtime to me by Wednesday night. The Thursday group had to get their downtime orders to me by Friday night. And then the patrons had to get their orders to me by Monday night. So that way,
Now, the way you're describing organizing this game makes sense to
yeah.
me, but was that something that you had always known about, or where did you harvest that? Was it in Tonisborg? Like, is it in the
No,
was
it really, it comes out of, I mean, it comes out of wargaming campaigns
from
and
from Hen?
map-based war games. Back in the day when they used to play these games by mail, turns were weekly or sometimes monthly. And you would send your orders to the referee, and he would email you back or mail you back an envelope with the results of your orders. And so there was a discrete weekly turn. And so I just adapted the digital environment for that for 2 reasons. One, because I knew that it worked in real life with snail mail, but also because I was running an always on campaign, and I had heard a lot of anecdotes about people trying to do this and getting orders every single day and getting burned out or getting overloaded and not having time to deal with all these orders. So at the very beginning, I established these guidelines. You can do what you want, but it's going to be slaved to the real life calendar. And if something's going to take 10 days to do and you tell me on the 11th, it'll be accomplished on the 21st. And but you have to give me your orders every week. If you don't give me any orders, you didn't do anything. That's fine. Because I had 2 sessions going, um, that meant that I wanted to have as much time as possible to either prepare for the session, respond to the plans, and then also be able to accommodate all of the downtime orders that were coming. Because I had 15 participants, 16
Well,
participants.
well, you had done conventional playing. You'd mentioned with other role playing games in the early '90s and stuff, and
Mhm.
so you had that setup of we get together and we do a role playing game, like a game session, as people call it.
Right.
So, what made you think, you know what I'm reading in Henry Hyde's book? I like he has a whole chapter, for example, in Discord, like in how to actually organize it and everything.
Right.
What made you look at that and you said, you know what, I should do this with this role playing game. Like this will just work for this role playing game.
Well, part of it came from the BroSR stuff that was on Twitter all over the place, and how they were talking about always on campaigns and time.
What year was this?
Oh gosh,
Had to have been
3 years
20.
ago? Or was it
Yeah.
2022, 2023, somewhere
Okay.
in there?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
want to say probably 2022. In fact, I had I had a
Because
long,
it
long,
Tonisborg and also Henry Hyde's book, so it had to be
yeah,
okay. So yeah.
but I had a long conversation with Jeffro Johnson on Twitter, a long argument about time and trying to make it work. because the campaign that I was initially running, the low fantasy gaming campaign, we were only playing for 2 hours, and a 2 hour long session was kind of new to me. But in the adult digital era, when you have work and
Right.
you have everything else and family and you have a wife and whatever, um, 2 hours is a lot of time, but it's not enough time really
You
to run a
you
one
can't waste any time. So
game.
if it's
You
2
can't
hours,
waste
it's you just
time.
have to do the adventure. You don't have any time to
You
sit
have to
around
you
and
have to race through the beginning to get to the adventure site. You have to race back home to get somewhere safe. And I didn't believe it would work or could work. And it's very hard to make it work. And it's not as much fun with a 2 hour session. But once you go, what happened was some of the people that were limiting the time, they dropped out of the game. And so I got down to 4 players and they were available for longer sessions. So we went to 4 hour sessions, and suddenly you've got more time to do more things in session. And then you've got more time, to get from the safe place to the adventure site and back and still have a satisfying session. And so that really brought me around to running the 1-1 time. But I was getting overloaded, and I was seeing lots of other people talk about being overloaded with downtime orders and people constantly wanting to do things. And so when I started Tanisborg and I had, 11 players that wanted to play in 2 different sessions, and I had lined up 5 different patrons, I said, something's got to give. I won't be able to accommodate 16 people sending me stuff every single day.
and
So
let me make sure for
that's when I
people
decided to go
people
with the
listening,
weekly.
when you say a patron player, you mean this is how I think about it. Tell me if this is correct. Um, like Tonisborg, and maybe it doesn't. I've read through it, but let's just say there's like, I don't know, a vampire on level 4, and he has a
Right.
vampire cult, and he has a treasure hoard and a lair. Instead of you running that vampire, you're going to say, "Hey, Bill, can you be this vampire?" And then like, here's kind of what you know, and then once a week or whatever, or once a month, or divvied up into 4 from once a month, you say, in very simple terms, here's what you know. Tell me what you would do, and then the elements
Correct.
down in there move around based on what your friends are choosing to do. Do I have that right?
That's correct. And
Okay.
and patron is the common term that's used by a lot of the BroSR guys. Personally, I prefer the term downtime player in that patron implies a certain level of power, a patron and a
Right.
protege were. But an NPC being played by someone else who's not in a regular session, they can be first level. They could be a 0 level character. They could be a merchant. They could be uh they could be literally anything. I had one of the most powerful patrons, downtime players in the Tanisborg campaign at the beginning was a black marketeer who was a 0 level dude. He wasn't even a thief. I mean, I didn't have a thief. I didn't incorporate the thief character class in Tanisborg because I wanted to strip it down and play the most old school game we could because it was the most old school dungeon available to us. And at the very beginning, when this dungeon was initially being played, there was no thief class. I had a pirate king, I had a goblin king, I had a gnoll king. So there were a lot of moving parts, and the goblin king got to grips with the Tuesday session and the Tuesday group, and so they were fighting all the time. And finally, the goblin king downtime player and the gnoll king downtime player, they got together to team up against the Tuesday group because the Tuesday group was becoming very powerful and they were constantly recruiting troops, and they built an army. I mean, from day one, they started recruiting troops and building an army, which is kind of what I was hoping for. And so there was the Pirate King was looting ships on the high seas and selling the cargo um, at the in the city, at the hub of the Tanasport campaign. Um, and whenever he would attack ships of country A, he would leave scraps and clues that it was done by the pirates or the soldiers of country B. And then he would attack the ships of
Nice.
country B and leave clues from country A. So country A and country B actually wound up going to war. The next door neighbors of the land where Tanasporg is, they actually went to war. So there was a war going on, and I had another friend kind of playing that war out on as time went on.
Now,
Um,
hang on. Let me freeze there. When you say a friend was playing that out, what you mean? You're like, hey, Tom, would you mind taking this and just playing this war out? Like, what does that look like?
I had a map of the two countries.
Yeah.
I made a list of their forces, and then I asked a friend of mine to be country B, and I was country A. And each week we would move our armies around on the map, and whenever they collided, we would do a very simple, but basically the rule cyclopedia type battle.
So
We would
the
just
the
roll.
adventure game created an imperative for a whole different war game, and then you played a war game.
And then so I was
With
playing a war game on the side in a very abstract form, and it was having repercussions in the game world with shortages of different equipment, shortages of foodstuffs or luxury items sometimes, and then refugees started to flow in to
what
the
did you
area.
use as a between, like you said that the economy was affected by things like and that affects the adventure game, and you're saying this war is affecting like goods and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so did you look at that and you just use your judgment, or did you use like Henry Hyde's rules and you like look at them and you're like, okay,
No,
well,
what actually happened was, um, there's a rule book called the Low Fantasy Gaming Companion, and it has a great domain events system. So it's a D100 table with, I think, 60 different entries. And so you roll a D100, and at the beginning of each month, I would roll this for each faction.
okay, so it's a
So
domain
once
event like in Tony
the
Bath, right?
domain event, it
Like
would
you
say,
have.
like,
uh,
there's a fire, or there's a wedding, or
okay.
die, or whatever. And so I was rolling on this for each of the three countries, for each of those five active factions, for each party, Tuesday and Thursday. And I would tell them, this X, happens to you because of this. But for the economics portion, I actually went to ACKS and basically took Macros's economics thing and bolted that on, because we were using the Blue Home rules, and they have no real economic
So
platform.
there are a lot of terms there in case anybody's listening. So I think I'm familiar with that. Adventure Conquer King is a
Adventure
role playing
Conqueror,
game,
yeah.
and it has rules like it'll have like when you go into a town, it says there are different marketplaces. This is kind of the boots on the ground example. So depending on the marketplace in a town, could affect, hey, I want to hire people. Well, this is what is available there because of a marketplace. And so Adventure Conquer King has all these rules like that that's famous for. Okay, so you were using those.
Adventure
Okay.
Conqueror King has the most well-developed economic system for any role-playing game that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think most people feel that way. Okay, so let me divvy
So,
this up into kind of phases here, and then I want to get philosophical. Okay,
okay,
so
let's do it.
you as a kid you played role playing games, and then you moved, and then that wasn't available. You played war games, and then at some point you started kind of digging into war games, like you started getting deeper, like getting to that Henry Hyde level of the iceberg, and
Right.
in vintage gaming, and then. Um, COVID happens, and you already have this vintage wargaming experience, and you get back into role playing games, and you take
Correct.
that mode of wargaming, and you've applied it to some of the campaign stuff. So now, um, I think most people listening, and we don't need to kind of exposit the entire history of this, but I think, as everyone knows, this is actually how it began. This is how this worked, and
Right.
I was always when I ran fifth edition, sort of, I don't know how do I put this. I always asked, why are these lines here? Why can't I play Monopoly? And this maybe sounds silly. A better example is my friend Jake and I talking about X-Wing, and I had a science fiction game that used 5e, and I said, why can't we have something cool like a X-Wing battle, and then have the role playing component after that? Like, I enjoy role playing, but why can't we have the meaning and the feeling of playing poker and the sense of danger, and then also have the role playing? What is creating this wall? And I saw games try to step across that wall. Like, an example is Lancer. Lancer is like a role playing game that has a war game, and there's just these two modes, right? And BattleTech tried to do that a little bit. It had a role playing game, and then you know, it had the war game. Um, and I tried a little bit, and it never worked. And then eventually, I had the similar experience looking back, where you can see that the beginning assumption is to start with a map with a bunch of stuff that's all in conflict, and that there's this system design of all sorts of interlocking elements of economics and wars and armies and cities and nobles and stuff. And that's the starting assumption. And then out of that, you could have an adventure game. And that's what Tony Bath, we've mentioned him a few times. I'm trying to think of some of his other contemporaries, but late 60s, early 70s, sort of in opposition to the Avalon Hill brand approach, where it's like, well, here's the box set and here's the rules, and this is how you're going to play Axis and Allies. Tony Bath was like, no, I have a world. I have Hyboria, and it's like a real world, and it has people in it. And like you said, he would have these have a friend who would work out of town as a salesman, and he'd be like, all right, I'll send you this later, tell me what you want to do. And then he would move his pieces and send him and it was just this world that was living and operating. And then by the
Right. Well,
time,
it was a play by mail world.
yeah, and that's
And so
just
there were
by
15 players, and they all played by sending letters and postcards back and forth.
and he
And
just
that's how
happened to
they
have
played.
his big
And
tenant,
he kept the record at his house. He had a big
right,
map on the wall, and he kept a record of where everybody was. And then everyone else had a little drawing, you know,
right.
of the map, and so they could guess where people were, or
And
whatever, for whatever information they might have had. And then when it was time for an actual battle, then, you know, Joe from here and Bill would get together at Tony's house and play the battle.
yeah, or even easy come, easy go, which I think is really mind blowing. It really shatters the entire traditional model of role playing games that developed by the early 80s, where they'll be like, oh, hey, Jim can't make it. Bill, do you mind playing Jim's character? Why not? Or Tony can't even umpire. Can you umpire for this session for Tony? And like, no one, whatever, right? So, like, because the world was preeminent, sort of skipping ahead here, like in the end of the afterword of the of first edition, and when Gary Gygax says, "So long as the ordering of play is correct, the rules or the game first, the campaign world second, the participants thereafter." Which is like blasphemy today in role playing games.
Right,
But it
right.
creates this entire easy come, easy go thing that allows the game to actually happen. Well, anyways, so this is just how it worked. And then when the creators of Dungeons and Dragons were playing in this punk sort of living world way in opposition to companies like Avalon Hill, they were doing free Kriegspiels. And so and Dave Wesley was an army officer, and he started experimenting with the free Kriegspiel that narrowed it down to the individual. But when you hear stories from like Gary Gygax, or you hear play reports, Rob Kuntz or Tim Kask or people like that, they'll talk about how like I remember this interview with Gary. He was talking about an adventure he was on, and he had a very high level adventure in Blackmore. And he's like, well, we were kind of bastards because we went and we knocked over this caravan because, you know, we had to feed our armies and we had all this stuff. And there's this hidden context that was left. So this is the foundation of everything. And we're not there at all. Okay. Like now, I would say role playing games, for the majority of people that play role playing games, this is utterly alien. So now let's get
Correct.
philosophical.
Yes.
The I've heard it called the elusive shift, where we go from simulating a world to conveying a story. How did that happen, and why did that happen, in your opinion? I'll just start with framing it. Like, what happened? Like, why did that
At the
happen?
very beginning. It happened at the very beginning when the game was first published. And it got into the hands of people that weren't wargamers. Because it says right on the cover, it is a set of rules, pencil and paper rules for miniature wargame campaigns. It's right on the cover. However, people were playing this game, and it was other people were playing even before it was published, and they were bringing in their friends. And so they would bring in their friends and say, you can be a wizard, you can be a warrior, you can be a priest, you can be a thief. And as it grew, people that weren't war gamers, they weren't familiar with war games, certainly beyond any kind of box game, maybe Risk, but that'd be about as far as they went. But they enjoyed the vicarious participation as being somebody else. And a lot of, even in the earliest Dragon magazines, I believe there's an article, a letter to the editor in Dragon magazine number 4, where someone talks about the war gamers and the theater kids. So it literally starts at the very beginning.
Yeah.
There's this dichotomy. And in order to make a company and have a commercial success selling products, you have to keep selling products. And once a war gamer has a rule book, they don't need any more products from you. But the non-war gamers, you can keep creating new things for them to buy. And so that's the direction it went. They also discovered, and Tim Kask has a great video about this. He talks about the early days of conventions. And they discovered quite by accident that the first time they played D&D at a convention, or first or second time, they ran adventures, and it was a competitive thing, and they had a winner. And then everybody wanted to buy the module, and they didn't have it. So the next time they went, they brought 100 copies or something like that, 200 copies of the competition module. And once the competition was over, they sold them. They sold them all. And it just grew from there. And so that's where that kind of came from as a path, a product path, that they could create these products and sell them. And so this enabled people to play that didn't have the time to generate their own, adventures or create their own scenarios or that sort of thing. And it gradually, that's a larger market. There's a lot more people that want to play a pre-made game than there are.
So you're saying that there's these two things are married, is that because to kind of frame that a little bit more, I would argue that role playing pre-existed 1960s wargaming. Now, that form of 1960s wargaming existed going back to the 19th century with Kriegspiel, which was made by a civilian. So some autistic nerd came up with that, proposed it to the king, Prussia. So like this is a civilian affair. It's people that have time and money, like H.G. Wells has the time and luxury to sit around and play with miniatures. So that's old, and by necessity, these people need to be kit bashers and creatives and designers and their own people. They can't be bound by a brand. So what I'm hearing you
Right.
say is that I guess I would say we're talking about a type of wargamer because Lord have mercy. Sure, the wargaming hobby sure is bound by a brand. I don't think anybody that they have it a lot worse than role players do. Like everybody's waiting to see what GW does. It seems to me, but the type of wargamer that is a kit basher that basically says I'm simulating a world that has Arneson's first rule that says this is the world. This is how this works. Like that person that has that imperative that can do that. There is a divorce there between that person and the person that's driven by an energy of a brand identity, and it turned so like role. I know what you mean. I think I used to. I remember the stories of Dave Wesley, right? And he felt like the game was a failure, but the participants enjoyed it because I think, and I wonder if this is the primordial soup of what you're describing, where in the participants were not actually all wargamers. So
Correct.
there were these casuals that show up, and they're playing a mystery dinner theater or playing
Okay.
werewolf. They're playing a parlor
Yes.
game where they're like, oh, I'm a baroness or I'm a group of university students in the 19th century or whatever. And they're able to do that and they participate very well. And Dave Wesley looks at this and he says, this is a technical failure. And the participants are like, I had a great time. I was a baroness, you know. And
Right.
then they start
Right.
dressing up.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
this is much easier to market. Like this is something that the market can be married
Sure.
right along with this, and it grows into the brand thing. And it's much harder to market the technical skill. This is one of the things as an aside. I don't know if you like Traveler, but like a bunch of us love Traveler, and I think
I played in high school. I haven't played since.
Traveler is this inherently kit bashy, tinkery, solo-y kind of thing where I would say the majority of Traveler people don't even do the role-playing game. I think they just make starships and they design sectors and they compare things and uh, there are just very few people that are going to get into that because it's challenging. It requires intellect. You have to be literate. It's just not easy. It's just not easy,
Sure.
and it takes time. So okay, I think I understand what you're saying. Okay, so that's the elusive shift. So,
Well, yeah, except that it's not elusive at all. I think the title of that book is misleading. It's very simple.
the brand
Um,
shift.
right. It should be called a brand shift or an aesthetic shift
yeah.
is what I might call it. Because if you go back, one of my goals when I started studying the old war games, and because I wanted to put together a concise set of rules for a simple map-based war game campaign. And I was grabbing it from different sources and and once again, I mean, I discovered that Henry Hyde was doing it with wargaming campaigns. So I stopped and waited for this to come out. And this is everything I wanted. Um,
Yeah, it's an amazing book. I
but
really
in the
think, yeah.
research I was doing, because I wanted to find out what did Gary know, when did he know it, and how did that influence his original game? Because I was trying to get all this put together before I started the Tanis board game, because I wanted that to be as old school accurate as possible. And I also didn't want to be the guy because Tanisborg comes with something called Zero Edition Dungeoneering. And that is a set of rules that is somewhat pre or proto Dungeons and Dragons. And Daniel Boggs had compiled a set of rules called Champions of Zed, Zero Edition Dungeoneering, ZED, um, a decade ago, I believe about 10 years ago. Now, unfortunately, it was done as a Kickstarter and only a limited number were made available. And then any extras were sold on Drive Through RPG. And when they were gone, they were gone. and you can't buy that as a PDF. And I couldn't find it on anywhere. No one was selling a copy. I did manage to get one last year off eBay, and it was expensive. Uh, but I also didn't want to be the guy that scanned the zero edition Dungeoneering rules onto a PDF and released them into the wild. I didn't want to do that. So that's why I chose Blueholme, because the Holmes rules also aren't available legally. But Blueholme is. And so that's why we're using that Blueholme without a thief class. But what I discovered was everybody in the Twin Cities and the Lake Geneva area were avid wargamers. They were also avid diplomacy players. And there was a huge diplomacy scene back in the early 70s, late 60s. And there are literally hundreds of diplomacy variants. There are Hyborian Age variants. There are Napoleonic variants. There are, 30 Years War variants. There are variants for any time period you care to think about. Um, and so that's a very specific niche group of people. And diplomacy is a game that is player versus player from the outset. And it's designed for one player to backstab another in order to win. And so it takes a certain kind of person, because diplomacy has been known, it's famous for breaking up friendships and relationships. It's famous for that. And so for a group to be avid diplomacy players and be mentally prepared to betray one another or take advantage of one another in order to win the game. Are we having a thing?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm fine.
Oh,
Well, let
okay.
me know actually, but yeah, no, I just wanted to
Well, I
make
can
sure the
hear you.
sound was
I can
okay.
hear you.
They have to
But
be picaresque, right? Is that I think that's I discovered
absolutely. And
this.
so
Yeah.
this is the group of people that started playing this game. And in 1971, in April of 71, Dave Arneson put out a note that he was going to be hosting a medieval Braunstein at his home. And he prepared a map. He prepared a bunch of factions. Some of these factions were assigned to friends before the game. And so they did maybe a little bit of development on their own. And then some were left for whoever might show up, because he didn't know who was going to show up or how many people there might be. And this turned into the Blackmore game over time. He did Dungeon Delves, he added that in, but it started with individual characters running small factions, and everyone had a group of soldiers. So it was basically a skirmish game. And they sat down and they moved their pieces on the map and said, my army's going here and my army's going there, and we're going to and that and interact. And it was an all-day thing. It wasn't a 2-hour session, it wasn't a 4-hour session. There were no boundaries other than the map that existed. And so, but all of these participants were used to playing diplomacy. They were used to playing map-based wargame. They were used to, it takes X number of days to move my troops from here to there. They were all familiar with the kind of game that was being described and how to play it. And when it came time for conflict, for army versus army conflict, they were also all familiar with the Strategos N or Strategos A rules that they were using, the war game rules that had been created by Dave Wesley. So all of these things together, and on top of that, they were all familiar with the same literature. They saw the same monster movies. They read the same books. They'd all read Jack Vance. They'd all read Robert E. Howard. They'd all read Edgar Rice Burroughs. So they were able to visualize the milieu, and they understood the mechanics that underlaid it. And when strangers started coming in, and casuals, as you said, they were familiar perhaps with some of that, but not all of it. And so they might have brought in their own interpretation of how to do a wizard or how to do a warrior based on other fiction or just their own imagination rather than being pigeonholed or being pre-selected into an existing milieu.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so
So
that's how the aesthetic shift happened. And so maybe Jim brings his girlfriend and plays Blackmore, and then they go back home because they were invited by Bob. And Jim and his girlfriend are like, that was so much fun. Let's do it. We can get the rules. The rules that buy them at the store. And they're like, well, we don't need this war. We're not going to play the war game because that wasn't fun or interesting to us. But playing wizards is. So let's play a wizard game.
yeah.
And they are
Now
familiar with Alice in Wonderland, perhaps, or, the Wizard of Oz and things like that. And so that's how the aesthetic shifted over time and space.
that makes sense to me. So let so I think you and I mean so you have a lot of history with war games. I do not. I was in the army. I was a general staff officer and stuff. So sometimes I kind of apply that, and I enjoyed those. Like actually, I actually genuinely enjoyed that. I would go on exercises like in Korea where we'd have a core war game, literally war game. Along one of the last war games I did was um, um Army Europe, U.S. Army Europe, and like what happens if Russia goes into Lithuania, and and we're like sitting around the table, and we literally war game this stuff, and you have observers and an opposition force and everything like that. So sometimes I think about it in that way now. I lean back on that because I don't have anything else to go on. I've read Henry Hyde's book and stuff, but just to say I'm new to wargaming, but I think both of us are excited about this approach to say, I think the thing that thrills me and that I didn't understand. So, right, like I get out of the army, right? And I had tried to play role playing games in the past before I was in the army or while I was in the army, and I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't find anybody. I get right before I get out, I find a group and we're playing. And as I'm getting out of the army, I tell you, the last thing I want to hear is war game. Like
Right.
I am done. I don't want any more of this. I got an honorable discharge. I got my DD 214. I never want to hear of this again. So in fact, I think one of the things I wanted like escape and innocence. That's I think what I wanted from Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't find it. I found other interesting things and I stuck with it, um, but I couldn't imagine. But I think what I misunderstood is maybe the verb form because we say that in the army, we'll say we need to war game that, and we could mean that about anything. We could mean that about like how we're going to clean out a supply closet or something.
Right.
So I think what I was missing is this actually simulates the world in an interesting way, a world in conflict that could be like you mentioned diplomacy, which certainly you have armies and resources and stuff, but that you can also just have intrigue or drama that essentially the heart of conflict and story is or of the heart of story and drama is conflict. And so
Right.
so war game sort of is an accurate way to describe this, but you can and I think this is our next plan in the clubhouse in a few months. We will have a war game of Classic Traveler, and there will be fleets, and there will be warships, but it will, I think, primarily be a war game of merchants and of
Mhm.
dominating markets and becoming wealthy. And I'm thrilled, like I'm excited about this. So I think what I misheard people talk about war games is it's a simulation of a world, which is fascinating. So I guess the last thing I wanna try to do with you, I've kept you for a while. I really appreciate you talking to me. Is um, do we even want to go back, or do we want to go forward, and how? Like, what does it look like? And I think both of us do. Like, it sounds like we're both excited about this modeling a world and then allowing it to play out with participants and being thrilled by the results. And that I heard you say, we were talking before we started recording, that you made this step over the line into the old school Renaissance as you started like looking like, okay, I used to play 1E, 5E is something totally different. This is alien to me. What's out there? And for all my old school Renaissance friends out there, I think most of them can't imagine. They can't imagine, oh my gosh, domain play sounds so painfully boring. It's not what I'm here for. I don't have any interest in that. And like me, they probably came from 5e and they're like, I never want to play above level 3 for the rest of my life. I want to be a muddy booted adventurer. I want to be in there looking for gold. For heaven's sakes, I never want to be important ever again, because they found the importance in the modern game took away their agency, really. So here's my pitch, and then let's workshop this. I'm going to throw this out to you.
Okay, because I have something for you, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, let's do this. Here's my pitch to the people that say, because we're already there, I think. I'm on board with the war game. You've been doing it for years now. For those that say, I don't want a war game, what do I have to benefit from this? One pitch I would have is the only way I can compare what we're describing, because there's nothing else like this, is EVE Online. That's as close as I can get, is maybe something like EVE Online, maybe Star Wars Galaxies, but EVE Online is the closest. Now, I'm not a big EVE Online guy, but, you know, there's news articles in Forbes about EVE Online. And the thing is that EVE Online has this simulated world where there are these people that, as part of their life, are doing these ridiculous dramatic things. They're like a space admiral as an alter ego, and they'll show up with a fleet of 1,000 starships, and they'll take over a sector of space. And then that will, for the next year, you will see the advertisements of this space warlord showing up on marketplaces. And you may not care about that. But what is pretty cool is you don't have to be that. You can just be a person that shows up and flies a starship around, and you're in the living world. And there's no other way to get there except to hand that to people to drive. That's pretty cool. Like, to put it on some kind of hypothetical map, strictly keep time, and then hand it over to people and say, do whatever you want in opposition to one another. When you have those 4 elements, all of a sudden you have a real honest world. And I think that sense of a old, persistent, massively multiplayer online game it still doesn't quite get it, because pencil and paper is completely open, so it's still not the same. But that's as close as I can even get to trying to describe what is on offer there.
Right. Oh, the sun is shining on my face. We put that shade down.
How would you pitch it?
My dream game, the way I would pitch my dream game, is that we get a dozen players together online or in person. Probably online will work best, simply because these people don't live in the same town. But my dream game is a game that exists on multiple scales simultaneously, which is what it was designed to do. Where there is a diplomacy scale, an international, worldwide scale. There is a factional scale, which is your merchants, your barons. The diplomacy scale is your kings, if you will. And then you have a scale of groups of people, a skirmish scale, perhaps. And then you have an individual scale. And it all happens simultaneously. And ideally, say you have 4 players, okay? Player A is the king of a domain. And player B and C and D, all of them are each kings. And they can have conflicts at the domain level. Also, each player has a faction level group or character, if you will. And perhaps all of you chooses to have, all 4 players have a faction level character or group within one of those kingdoms, or perhaps 2 of those kingdoms. And then all of your players have 3 characters, one in each of the other kingdoms. None in your kingdom. No factions in your kingdom. Your kingdom, you're purely the king, and then your factions are in other players' area, in other domains. And so when A, B, C, and D get together, they can go adventuring in C's domain or B's domain or wherever. Um, and you can even come back into your domain. And the things that you do will be persistent, and you can go on adventures. And you have a referee who creates these dungeons and creates, moderates the conflicts. And then the factions are doing things to and with and for each other in each of the domains. But it all connects level to level, or scale to scale, I should say. don't want to use the word scale to scale. They all mesh together seamlessly. So what I do as player A in my domain have an effect on the other players' domains. It will also have an effect on all of our factions, and it will also have an effect on all of our players.
Right.
So if, as the king of a land, I declare magic to be illegal, suddenly any magic user characters that are controlled by other players, they got to get out. So that's a dramatic thing. So that would be my dream game, where all these things are combined, but you can't use meta knowledge. You don't have the meta knowledge filter back up, and your king can do what he wants to do, and there's still that fog of war going on. So even though you know what this adventurer is doing, you know, um, you would have to, in order to have the meta information, your faction leader, say, would have to send a message to the king. You know, he's adventuring in domain C and he sees this XYZ happen. He can send a messenger to the king of A,
Right.
which is his own player, and say, "Look, this is what's happening."
So
Um,
I've got,
I
I
think
think,
I think that would be I think that would be absolutely fascinating to play. And if you slaved it to the real world calendar and you kept strict time, um, and you put people in time jail if they get too far ahead, I think I just think that would be absolutely the pinnacle
yeah.
of a game.
So I have a couple questions, and then I'm going to keep kind of poking at this.
Sure.
Let's advertise this to the person that says, this sounds really complicated. It sounds really hard. And it also sounds deviant from just this experience of being this muddy booted adventurer, which is what I'm here to escape to do. So the first question I have in that is, how do you achieve that picaresqueness? And maybe you can't. Let's just say, okay, maybe you can't, because we're talking about blasphemy here. We're talking, I mean, never mind being a king in the world in one sense, and then simultaneously operating maybe two or three characters of different alignment. Let's just say you have a really invested player and you have the really robust thing that some people are doing with first edition or something, where you've
Mhm.
got, and hey, I want you to control this major domain, but also I have an evil half orc, like that's like neutral evil, and I also have a elf who is lawful good, and so you have
Mhm.
these different elements. This utterly transgresses the quality that modern role playing games have, where you're meant to
Right.
immerse yourself in the character and never metagame. Like you cannot know
Right.
of the other things. So is that just something you have to say? Hey, look, if you want to have this participation in a living world, you just have to get over that, and you just have to say
Yes
that it's
and no.
it's not it's not sacred in the sense of like the dungeon master isn't metagaming by knowing everything. So we're going to break down that wall, and you're really going to be more on equal terms with the dungeon master now, where you're just a participant. Like, and it's just like friends looking down at a table. And if you can't make that, like, is that the transition people need to make, or how else could someone be so picaresque to be like, well, I have a king with a bazillion gold pieces. I'm just going to give that to this orc over here, and I'm going to, as they say in the MMO world, I'm going to twink. They call
Right.
it twinking. You know.
Right. Well, number one, there would be a meta rule again. number one.
So just don't do it.
Uh, right. You
Okay.
just you can't do that. You as a king can't just give gold to your character, your individual character
Seems
that's
reasonable.
separate from the king.
Yeah.
That would be an there needs to be a set of meta rules to govern metagaming. Now that being said, I would not expect there to be more than 2 or 3, maybe 4 players that would want to participate in a game like this that would be
One on multiple levels. So it's okay to be a participant and
would
say, I
there,
don't want to know. I love this is triple blind. As
there
an
would be
example, I,
very,
I
very
have this problem
few
right now.
players who could play a king and a faction and an individual.
Right. That makes sense.
But
And
it would not be beyond the realm of there might be a person who wants to participate, but they can't really make a session. But they could be a king. They could be a downtime player. And so they get all the information. They have access to the Discord and they can see all the public facing information. And then I, as the referee, would feed them other things that they would know based on what other players are doing and other characters are doing. And so they can play in a play by post style as a king, or
right.
they can play in a play by post style as a faction.
I
The sessions are reserved for individuals. And so anybody who wants to be an individual player, I wouldn't even care. I might even have you could have multiple DMs, 3 or 4 DMs running the same world as long as we're all on the same page. We'd all have access to the same information and the strict calendar. And if party A of 6 different individuals goes off to ransack a ruin and it takes them 3 weeks to do so, well, you know what? Today, what day is today? Today's August 18th. They're on September 10th. So between August 18th, they have a session. They go through September 7th, adventuring, getting to this place, getting their supplies, diving in, doing the delve, coming back and arriving at another town, say on the other side or closer. Those characters, those individual characters, are out of action until September 10th,
right.
right?
This is the
And
timekeeping. Yeah.
and anything that they may want to communicate to their faction or to their king, perhaps they have a patron who is a faction leader or a king who may be funding them. Um, but they're just an individual player. They're not playing a king. They are a different player altogether. They can't learn about it until September 10th. So
Yeah.
as the dungeon master, as the referee, you would compartmentalize the information that these players have, these characters have,
Yeah.
and start doling it out. So if those players on August 20th went through a town and got in a fight, with the guards or whatever, then you could tell the king on August 21st, hey, there was a big fight in this town and these,
Yeah. And
adventurers were through
back
and they caused trouble, but they wouldn't find out until the real world calendar was August 21st.
so I'm hearing three solutions, right? So
Correct.
the problem is, hey, and let me frame it this way, because right now in our war game, maybe the big payoff to the war game, I think, for the participants right now is the sense of playing Battleship, the tension of like, I don't know what they're doing. Like there's this like
Right.
tantalizing mystery. I think
The
that's
fog of war.
yeah, that is the main draw, I think. And so the threat is you'll lose that, right? Like, so you'll have a participant in one faction, and we've had some, like we've had factions perish and patrons go down. And I'm
Hmm.
like, now what do I do? And eventually I came to the conclusion. I was like, you know what, Glenn, I don't care. You can play in this next faction. He's died twice now. So he's been in 3 factions. So now he
Right.
has this perspective, this thread among 3 factions where he's 3 factions over and he's like, oh, I know what's going on over there. Now that could be fun for him. But the threat is that if you're playing at multiple levels in different places, you can piece together the thread and ruin the mystery for yourself. But I'm hearing 3 solutions. Number 1, Obviously, you cannot twink. I call it twinking, which is you have a really powerful entity that says, "Hey, level 1 guy, here's like 100,000 gold." You can't do that.
Right.
Number two, you don't have to. If that's fun for you and you want to participate, like I'm thinking of my future classic traveler game. If you want to be Doomerest and you do not want to be the guy from the Poul Anderson novel, the Captain Rajan or whatever his name was, don't do it and just make a character and you're fine. And if you
Yep.
only want to be a domain player, you can do that. Or if you want to play, and do so at your own risk. And then number three, the timekeeping, the sense of realism in the world is only going to give you a piecemeal snapshot anyway, which might be
Right.
fun for some people because when I ran story back when I did 5e and I did a more story centric game, I had this whole story, but they only had the perspective of whatever character they were in the moment. But I ran multiple adventures across multiple places. So they'd have, like, one guy had 3 different characters. He would be in one character and see an impact of a thing over here and be like, oh, that's neat. I know that from that other game. So okay. It sounds like we've solved that problem, in my opinion. So let me,
Right.
and I'm
And there's a
sorry, I
there's
know
a
I'm,
there's a corollary to that I do want to throw out because this was a big discussion in some Twitter circles over the past year or so. And that's, say you have a party of adventurers that's involved with adventures, and say that there's an orc tribe nearby that is threatening that town. There is a school of thought that says if you have elite level players, you can give one of those players control of the orc chieftain, and that player is simultaneously a party member defending the town and the orc chieftain attacking the town. Now, it may be that there is a player out there who would enjoy the mental challenge of that. Personally, I've 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 played in a couple of diplomacy style games where I was England in one session and then I was France in the next session.
yeah,
And in the previous session, I was England and I set up some stuff to attack France next time. But because we did a random selection for the second turn, I got to be France. And I knew I had in-game knowledge that I was England and that there were a bunch of guys, in Spain on my border. And it
yeah,
ruined it for me. It
right.
wasn't fun. It was not fun. I like to consider myself a pretty good wargamer, and I played it without, taking advantage of that meta knowledge, but it wasn't fun. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
removed the fun for me.
To me,
And so for
this is
myself,
the line
those
that,
players, right? Those players that are part of that party that are defending the town, if you want to have someone run the or chieftain, they have to be separate. It has to be someone outside of that group. And that's why I call them downtime players, because they are players who do not participate in the session because you're going to ruin it for them. Maybe they can do it. Maybe they're super compartmentalized or whatever. They have a mental condition, separate those things out. But number one, I doubt it. And number two, you're stealing their fun. It's not going to be as fun for them. You're taking away the fog of, and you are going to spoil the surprise that the orcs could lay on the town, or that the town could set for the orcs. They could set a trap. But if you're playing both sides, the
sure.
surprise will be spoiled.
But
And
it
one
sounds
has
like
to take
it's a solvable and dialable problem, as it sounds like.
absolutely.
Like,
It is
look,
a solvable problem.
if
Absolutely.
you don't want to do this and you want more mystery, have at it. Sounds great, And if you want to operate at multiple levels, it does sound like one thing you have to have is you utterly have to be able to trust the keys of the kingdom to co DMs or co referees and
Right.
patron players. Like, you can't hand it over to somebody who's immature, which is
Right.
part
And
of
that
the
and that comes through playing with somebody for years.
yeah.
I had one of the players in my current game, um, 2 years ago. Uh, I had a kind of a medical thing come up, and I took the month of May off, and players, and he stepped in to be the guest DM for a while, and there wound up being a total party kill, but that's another
Well,
and then this past May, when I had my surgery, I just wasn't physically capable of dungeon mastering, and so one of the other players stepped in, and he actually ran a completely different thing with different characters, but just to keep the sessions,
right,
to keep Thursday nights going, he stepped in and did it, and he could have run games in the world, but he didn't want to because he didn't want to know.
right. Yeah, and I've had we I don't know if you
Well, that was fun
um,
in and of itself.
we have the this just happened the longest running OSR actual play on the internet now using Rappanathic, and for about a year and a half that went for three and years and change, and it was handed over to my friend Richard, and he ran it for a year and a half. So yeah. Okay, so here's my last thing. So we talked about like making this transition into wargaming. We talked about what could happen if you have these different modes. We talked about why this happened, like, because it started as a war game and simulate the playing at the world. I hope that's not cringe for everybody, but I think it's a useful statement. And then it became this thing that is a totally different hobby. It's a totally different thing, mostly focused on stories, interactive storytelling. And then for some of us, we're like, we just want to go back. This simulating a world is fascinating. Now,
Yes.
I think it's challenging. I think it requires you to read. Like when I did a Traveler, well, first of all, you were talking about Jeffro Johnson. I had to, there we go, his book, Appendix
Yep.
N. But
Yep.
I mean, this is just his commentary. I started going through that recently, but a few years ago, before I started my original D&D game, I read Offering the Grey Mouser. I read Three Hearts and Three Lions because I was like, I have to understand this. I can't convey it, and it changes it, and
Right.
it made it different. And then when I started doing Traveler, I started reading Winds of Gath and Princess of Bars and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very challenging approach to things, to be a tinkerer and to be I want to convey this world instead of a story.
Sure.
So we're already there though, right? So like, but for the person that says, because I think this is really predominant. What bothers me most of all is it's predominant in the old school Renaissance. I actually have this conversation regularly because they're coming from the modern game where the modern game constantly wants to be epic. And it's fatiguing. It's tiring. By the time you get to 7th level in the modern game, you're like, I quit. I am so tired. This is exhausting. And sessions fall apart and all this kind of stuff. So we have all these people that I relate to that came over to the old school Renaissance, and they're liberated. They're liberated by the free form of rules and by the openness of systems and by being just some schmuck. And they love being a schmuck. And I like being a schmuck. I love playing dungeon crawl classics and rolling 3d6 down the line and all that stuff. I love it. So if you were to convince me, like, first of all, everything that we've described, technically I think is interesting, but it sounds overwhelming. It sounds like too much. And I don't want to do it. I just want to go into the dungeon of Tonnisburg, and I don't have much time, and I want to buy it and referee it. And you know that doing an OSR game is relaxing by comparison to other game systems. You just convey it and let them make their choices. It's actually quite relaxing. And the participants, it's not hard to do. Why would you want to do EVE Online with pencil and paper? Why would you want to do that? I mean, like, how would you convince people? If this is a message to the OSR, why would we tell them they need to go back to the war game? Why?
Well, and it's funny because I have that conversation weekly.
Don't we?
Um,
Yep, I do.
and I just tell people, just try it. I mean, I don't want to sound mean. This kind of game isn't for everyone, and that's okay.
I
That's
think that
okay.
that's one good thing to say sometimes. I had this
Right?
conversation with
There-
Matt Finch, and I was like, how did we do this? And I loved. He said, it's hard. Maybe
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
maybe it's going to be hard.
Not everyone is Matt Finch, right?
Yeah,
Not everyone is Michael Jordan. Okay, there there are there are professional basketball games, there are college basketball games, and there are street games, and there are games played by kids, in a driveway, and they're
right.
different games.
Like, do
Each
you
one of
ever
those is a different
do you,
game, and you can't expect someone who just wants to shoot some free throws in their
free
driveway
throws, right? To be in a
to
tournament circuit, like
to
it's
to to go down to
a
Madison
bracket.
Square Garden and play with the Celtics or whatever. You can't ask that. They might not want to do it.
Yeah, I
And
don't.
that's cool. That's
Right.
cool. Because you know what? You can still play in one of my games as just a player who just shows up on Thursday night and plays their character.
Ah, see there, I think you've hit on something really important and magical, though. I think that right there is key. Is
You are welcome to come to my Thursday night game and just play your fighter.
right. So that's huge, right?
Okay. And
Because
you don't even have to do downtime stuff because when we get done with tonight's game, and if today's the 18th, the next game is going to be on the 24th, right? And you guys have gone to you've played ahead to the 21st. If you don't want to do anything on the 22nd and 23rd, you don't have to. I don't.
so
That's fine.
so here's this
You're
is
going
my
to miss. You're missing out.
right. Yeah,
That's
but
okay.
th-
But that's okay because the other guys in the group, if they're playing out to the 21st and they get home, and then on the 22nd and the 23rd, they go out and recruit troops, or I get their magic items identified, or they do other things. They're participating more, but that's okay, and they can get more experience. Because I've changed the way experience works too, but that's
so
probably another
I
conversation.
think this is my big pitch here. This is the imperative. And I'm going to even say, if there are any old school Renaissance people listening, you must do a war game. You must. And this is why. This is the imperative. There is something that is, it appears a certain way that it isn't, which is that if you create these conventions wherein the game operates according to a strict time, like everyone's operating on the same time, and it's laid out that way, and you have tight conventions on what people are doing, and you just let it play out, a really unusual result is that every single person can participate at any level. And
Correct.
you can't do that. So let's start with conventional play, like how most people play 5e with pause and play. Well, eventually, I think with your friends, you're going to want to get above level 5. I think most people do. So if you have a group of adventurers and they're playing conventional pause and play, then at some point, say, hey, I want to try Dungeons and Dragons. Now you have two options, right? You can say, well, yeah, sure, head, come on and join us. Make a level 5 character, which immediately has two problems. Number one, that means the actual challenge aspect of the game of the level 5 characters is meaningless because you can just make a level 5 character. That's the whole point of progression in that scheme, is that there's a challenge. Otherwise, why are we doing it? There are a lot of games like that there where I'm like, why are we even leveling? Like, let's just get to the fun part. But then the other thing is you're asking this brand new person to come in and start a level 5 character. They've never played the game, and it's complicated. So
Yep.
here's what's actually going to happen. So this is social technology. This is just a result, a feedback loop in a broken system. Newcomers aren't going to join. It's not going to work, and they're not going to join, and the game will stay in the basement. So that's one consequence. But let's say you have an old school Renaissance game. Well, you have a similar problem. If you have if you focus on a monogroup, and let's say you're doing one for one time even, or not. Let's say it's pause and play, or you're doing little modules. You either can't ultimately invest in something persistent and long term, or you have to come in with all the weight of everything that's happened. And if you have a setup that's just a world that doesn't care and everything's operating one for one in I call it agonistic, agon. It's like an arena, like there's something at stake. there's a war, people are fighting with each other, there's a PvP component, something is at stake. You can show up as a level 1 magic user with a sleep spell, and you're useful. And if you have that picaresque attitude, you can participate at that level. Or like you said, and this is the mind-blowing one, and I'm going to give a specific example. I'm going to call him out. And you may see him in the war game. Magnus, my friend Father Chris, right? Father Chris played Magnus the magic user for 3 years, and he's level 7. Okay? Really important in the world. Soccer season comes, and he's a stay-at-home dad. He's like, I can't play. I can't do these scheduled sessions where I play for 3 hours. I'm sorry, guys. Everybody has this problem. This is the demon of role-playing games, is scheduling. And so it's like, oh, sorry, Father Chris, I guess you can't play with us anymore. Or the game shuts down. And that's not what's happening. He issues 1 order a month. He has all the power of that entity. He issues an order, and he's a power player on the map. And he's able to participate at that level. So you have some people that are playing in the adventure game, and they're playing the adventure game. You have some people that are playing in this play-by-post manner, and it can change. Soccer season will end. Things will change. He'll be able to come back to the adventure game. And every single...
He's stopped being a session player, and he's become a downtime.
Yeah, and then he can go back. And so every single participant can play. And this is the magical turnkey to map campaign play that I'm pitching to all of you old school Renaissance people out there, is that every single one of your friends that, that is to say, of course, a healthy participant that's going to be social, not an antisocial person, but that's a different problem. If it's a social person that can participate in it, every single one of your friends can play, and you can play with 50 of them. Because, and this is the other thing I want to pitch, if it happens 1-for-1 time, I have it's linear. So because it's linear, I have a list. And so when someone says, hey, I want to build a shipyard, and it's in their monthly order, I go, all right, talk to you in 6 months. And I have this list, and it pops up, and it'll go ding, ding, ding. And that takes me, 5 minutes. I did it today. I had some stuff. There was an order received. There was a horse rider that came back, and I just send that out, and it took me about 5 minutes. I'm like, okay. And the mind-blowing thing is, this is an easier way to run the game. It's actually easier. This is actually easier than trying to keep everything pause and play and manage and orchestrate the whole thing all the time.
Recruiting troops is very simple. There is a process. There are rules for it that I've created because they don't exist in Blueholme. And so I borrowed some rules from Adventurer, Conqueror, King, created a process, posted it into the group shared document folder. And each month I generate each month I generate how many of each type of troop is available in each settlement. And if someone wants to recruit them, they can go and spend their gold and roll their dice and see if they can recruit those dudes. The players are empowered to do that. I trust them to do that fairly.
Yeah, I posted the rules, and I have some players
from their gold, and I don't have to be involved. The only thing I have to do is take 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes, and roll up how many of each troop type are available. Actually, one of the guys in the Tuesday group made a spreadsheet that does it automatically. So technically speaking, all I have to do is open that spreadsheet, copy paste, and there you go. So I could do it in 2 minutes probably.
Yeah.
If you want to, one of the things in the Holmes edition is that starting at first level, magic users can scribe spells and clerics can make potion. So each spell scroll takes 1 week and 100 gold pieces per level of spell. So if a 3rd level magic user wants to write a 2nd level spell onto a scroll, it will take 2 weeks and cost them 200 gold pieces. So they're going to be out of the game for that time period. If one of my players is going to be out for 3 months, he can tell me, hey, I'm going to sit down and write a bunch of scrolls.
Yep.
And that's what
Magnus.
he's doing.
By the time this comes out, this won't be a spoiler, but of course, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I know people. It's funny. People are going to be like, "That's not how that works." But all right, listen. In Swords and Wizardry, polymorph other. It doesn't have any restrictions on this, so this is. Eventually, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to add a restriction to this. So they took their stable of horses and they the magic user Magnus. I also rule that if it's you call it downtime play, I call it non-adventure gameplay. I distinguish
Mhm.
between if you're on an adventure or not on an adventure, and if you're not on an adventure, what can you do? But anyways, so if you're not adventuring, I usually have a magical task take about a day. Just I use big round chunky numbers. So anyways, so they take their stable of 30 horses and he starts trying to polymorph other them. Now I system shock them, so they start killing a bunch of their horses. But ultimately, now they have this stable of a squadron of Pegasi. And that to me is like scroll construction or magical research or
Right.
anything. And he can just say that. He can say, for the next month, I want to do this. So this is my pitch. And I think I'm coming to this. I'm going to put this on the front of our interview, okay? If
Okay.
if you if you play a story-based trad Dungeons and Dragons game, maybe you don't have to listen to what I'm saying but if you are an old school Renaissance person and you want a world that is emergent, that just like you're like, I don't care if they live or die. I want interesting choices and situations. Every single one of you all should be doing a war game underneath. Every single one of you. Every single person doing an old school Renaissance game, even if you only rarely play. Even if you only have 2 players, you should do this. And my pitch for that is 3 things. Number one, if you do that, you won't have scheduling issues because the game will expand or contract according to what is happening in the war game. And you use your common sense and you say, hey guys, I can't really schedule this. Can we roll this out? No big deal. And the game will continue and and you'll be able to do it according to what the participants can do and need. And secondly, every single friend that is a healthy gamer that you want on board, every single one of them will be able to participate at their level and their level of interest. You could have 50 players and it won't be. And then the third thing is, if you do this, it's actually more relaxing because in my pitch on this is, I always say in Rapanathic, I never made anything. I'm serious. I never added anything. I got the Rapanathic book like you did Tonisborg, and I use my apophenia like when something comes up with an encounter procedure, but I never added anything. So there was an adventuring group 2 years later on a different day that ran an adventure into a dungeon level and saw markings on a wall. And some player had put that there 2 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way to do that unless you do this, I think. So uh, everything happening in the war game, I didn't design any of it. It's stuff that the players are
Right.
doing.
Right.
Yeah,
And in pause time, that might never have ever happened. If you're doing pause time, you can take
you have to
it,
contrive
it
the entire thing. If you do pause time,
it
you have
might
to
take
come up
you
with that
3
whole thing.
months to do 2 days.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? You could play 3 months worth of sessions where you do pause time because people are goofing around or, having a conversation with the innkeeper about potatoes or whatever. Um, and 2 days in game might pass in 3 months in real life. And so the idea of a living world just evaporates. What's the point of having a living world if you know what I mean? If
right.
you spend 6 weeks of playing every single week, but it's only one dungeon delve in one afternoon, right? What is the point of even caring about a living world?
Yeah, yeah. And I
But if
guess my
the
final
world exists, and if you force the world to exist, I mean, yes, I have done pause time. 1-1 pacing is not a suicide pact, okay? But when the world continues week by week and month by month, and things continue to change, the climate changes, the weather changes, the actions of other factions are happening, regardless of whether or not the players do anything, right? Um, there was something this happened this past year on Halloween. I had rolled an event earlier in the year that a meteor or a comet was going to come, and it was going to make great changes to the world. Okay, I had to figure out how that was going to be. Well, you know what? I have strict timekeeping. So I scheduled it for Halloween. I'm like, what a better time to have the world, the
Nice.
walls between the living and the dead, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened was there was going to be a comet that was going to strike the earth. I was going to do a Mordheim, and I was going to turn my main city into Mordheim because the comet was going to strike it, and I thought it'd be really cool. Well, you know what? The players put the kibosh on that. They released a super entity that had been imprisoned for a long time, who was the enemy of the comet entity. And they released her, and she went up and fought the comet entity, and it was amazing. And that changed the campaign world in a different way. That it was a surprise to me.
Right. I mean,
You know what I
I
mean? But
suppose that's one thing is if you want to
they
do
had
this, you have to be committed.
they knew that Halloween was the cutoff
Yeah.
even months before. So they had to complete their tasks by Halloween in the real world. Now, unfortunately, a couple of things came up, and there were some medical issues and what have you, and so we did some pauses, and so it actually happened in November. But that's
That's just common
yeah,
sense though, right? Like you just play the game when
right.
you can. That I
Yeah, not a
people get
suicide.
all hung up about, oh, one for one, does that mean I'm pooping at this time? Like they do that kind of joke, you know? And it's like you should use common sense, right? Like that's silly, you know? Yeah. I mean,
They knew. I mean, they had the pressure. The pressure was on the group to achieve the goal they wanted to achieve for the comet came and hit the world,
yeah.
before the comet came. They wanted to do this thing before the comet came because their whole plan was if they released this supernatural entity that they would be able to bargain with it, hey, we're going to cut you loose. Can you do something about this comet? Can you do something about this comet? And and it worked out. Kind of in their favor, kind of not. It's a different world now. Because some other things changed, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, and they did just recently defeated the Vampire Queen patron player who put things in motion 2 years ago that finally came to fruition
Amazing.
Halloween because of that.
And
A
how can that not carry a lot of gravitas, right? Like how can it not feel
it's, it's amazing.
so impactful when it's like a player has been brewing this
For
for
me,
2
for
years?
me as a referee, I
Yeah.
didn't know that these things were going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was a plan,
I think you have
and
to
the
commit to that,
player,
right? Like that's one
yeah,
thing you
the
can't.
Downtime player
Yeah.
was working to make these things happen, but they might not have. And some of the things that these guys came up with are things I would never have thought. Or if I did think of it, I'm like, oh, I don't. I mean, some of the patron players. I mean, the Pirate King starting a war between two nations. I would never have done that. That's sure, but that's what happened. So I did it, and it was fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, one of the cool things is, and I think this was a first for this type of gaming. I actually had a patron player, the Pirate King, who was physically playing the naval battles with his nephew. He would set up. He had little paper cutout ships, and he used the Tony Bath Donald Featherstone rules that I published on my itch.io. Um, and he was literally playing the game, the confrontations between the ships. He was playing them out as miniature battles with his nephew.
That's
How,
amazing.
how cool! How cool is that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that
And then he would write back
that
what happened, and I would tell him
I
what
suppose this is really hard. This is kind of harder to express, but I've noticed this that because of this wargaming substrate, there is too much gaming to go around, and it
Yeah,
all
yeah,
happens
absolutely.
with a lot of gravity and meaning because it's stuff that's happening in the world. It does seem like you have to commit to being like, I don't know if you have an idea, you know how things want to go. This is probably not a good way to go. Like I think you have to be willing to say, I'm down with anything. I think that's one thing. But if you're willing to do that, and then I think the other thing is, it does seem to me that you have to have the power as a participant to be picaresque. If these are your special darlings, this is, oh man, I don't know. Like,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Well, in the low fantasy gaming campaign, when I was using the domain events from the companion book, I rolled up that a dragon attacks the town. Okay, well, I didn't plan that. I didn't particularly want that to happen because I had fully detailed this town and it was supposed to be the home base for the players
oh
for
man,
them to
yeah.
go out and do their different adventures. They didn't happen to be home that day, somewhere else. And so I rolled for the battle. I ran the battle between the dragon and the town, and the dragon destroyed completely devastated the town.
Yeah.
I rolled a random event and I destroyed a town in my own campaign that I didn't want to. But hey,
And actually, I should note,
dice,
in case
dice
someone
is hard.
now OSR people will understand what you're saying, but if you're not an OSR person, you play role playing games. A lot of people look at this and they misunderstand randomness, right? So there's input randomness and output randomness. There's, how does it, what actually is going to happen, and then what's going on. And if you use it in a certain way, going back to playing at the world or having a living world, I tend to think of, just as an example, of a random encounter list, but it could be a random event list. Like Tony, you're mentioning the one you're using from Low Fantasy Gaming, but other systems have this. BECME had it, uh,
Mhm.
um, but Tony Bath has it. He has a list of campaign events that can happen, like an assassination and blah blah blah.
Right,
And the
right.
thing is that this is an ecosystem. It actually gives greater realism to the world, in the sense that, like, it's not all contrived. You don't have the weight of balancing everything. It actually models a world of interdependent living things,
Right.
and it does it very simply. So, in some ways, when we say a random event, we kind of mean the opposite. We mean a thing in the world that is happening, and that's more honest than if you're sitting and trying to write it out and what's going to happen next. Never mind the
Right.
fact that you have to do all of that, which is exhausting, if that's your
Right.
approach. So, just to say, if there are people that are kind of like not familiar with like random events and random encounters, that's
Yeah.
all.
And I mean, the idea of a dragon, you know, that that put the kibosh really on I guess part of the campaign that I was thinking was going to happen. I mean, I was anticipating it. I hadn't planned it. It wasn't that my players and their characters were on a railroad and they were going to
Yeah.
have to use the town, but it was convenient and they had been talking, oh, you know what? We're going to buy a house there and we'll set up in this town and we'll
Right.
we'll operate out of this town. So I was getting ready for that. I was gearing up for that and then the shows up out of nowhere and destroys it. Which
Right.
turned into a really cool thing because the dragon actually took a bunch of people hostage, or I guess enslaved them, and dragged them off to its lair and put them to work in the mines, digging gold for it. So it had troglodyte slaves, it had human slaves, and the players decided, hey, we're going to go rescue the people. And so
Right.
they
And
went and
you
found the
didn't.
dragon's lair, and they made a plan, and they hired a bunch of troops, and they went in, and they fought the troglodytes. They released the people, and they yeah, they wound up defeating the dragon. It was a really cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Someone might call it Dungeons and Dragons or something, like,
Yeah.
if they were to call.
And I didn't have to make any of it up. The dice made it all. It
Yeah.
was really cool.
Yeah, and I think what people might understand is you get to be surprised by that, and so this was a surprising event. But these models can be as simple as a D6, but they can be more complex too. But whatever it is a model. Most of them are very good, and so if a dragon shows up, it is rare and significant and interesting, and that's not happening every day. So I think people that are afraid of letting go, and they're coming from the trad world, brother or sister, like, that world is exhausting. Let go. And if you do this method, it's so relaxing, and then you get to play and be surprised, and it's actually way more relaxing because you're just going to convey that model and see what happens, and you get to be surprised too. Um, yeah. So it's not like just everything you create is just always destroyed by a dragon.
Right.
That's silly. No. Um, but uh, but when it happens, that's really wild. And I even commit to I call this blorbiness. It comes from a blog about it that like what is real in the world and what how do you convey realness? And I think the ethos of the world, like if it's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, maybe it's Appendix N. You have to have that underlying thing, but then what you concretely reveal um, happens via apophenia. It happens, okay, I have an encounter. Oh my God, I rolled a dragon. Let me do my reaction roll. Oh my God, the reaction roll is really high. What does that mean? And then I've already read the novels where, you know, I've seen interactions with beasts like this and stuff. And so I convey it at that moment, it becomes solid in the world. That's not to say you can never design anything, but the amazing result of this approach is I often say, I didn't design Otherworld. The players played in it, and I conveyed the procedures, and a world came out, and we you know,
Right.
and I don't ever prepare. I don't prepare. I do no prep. My preparation for Otherworld as the adventure game is I write the in-world weather, the in-world date, and that is it on the top of a piece of paper, and the rest I keep notes on things if I need to. The rest I use game procedures and apophenia. And I guess I'm at this point, I'm trying to convince old school. The more I think about it, I'm like, I think that I've come to the conclusion. I brought this question to you. Uh, why did this shift happen? And now should we go back? And I think the hypothesis I'm arriving at is every single old school Renaissance person should have a wargaming mode. I think so.
Well,
That's where I'm at. Now, listen, if you're playing,
my philosophy
if
my philosophy is that the world takes center stage. The world
right,
continues to
this
exist
is a method
whether
of that.
or
Yeah.
not you have players and whether or not they do anything. Regardless of what the players are doing, the world goes on.
Yep.
You know, it's going to be spring, and then it's going to be summer, and then it's going to be fall, and then it's going to be winter. And it's relatively easy and not time consuming to figure out what is each kingdom going to do, because you don't have to do all of them, just the ones around your area. You know, what are the factions going to do, and how will they respond to some random events? And you can do all that in an hour or so, just because you don't have to write out a big thing of box
Yeah,
text.
the the
All
the
you need
the
is an
inversion
outline.
that's surprising is this is
All you
actually
need is one
easier.
bullet point.
Yeah.
All you need is one bullet point. What really transformed my game, honestly, was looking at how Borg had originally been designed, and it was a drawn dungeon, and then the original key, you know, room one, 75 points of goblins, meaning 75 chainmail points worth of goblins. And then the treasure, you know, 500 gold pieces. That was it. Everything else. If there was something fancy, maybe he thought of something. Oh, they have a they have a fireplace and they're smoking meat or what, you know, whatever. So some of them have additional little, you know, cool things that he thought of while he was writing these things down. But everything else was on the seat of his pants.
Yeah.
But he knew that 3 doors down there is a wyvern. So maybe as you're creeping down this hall, you hear the wyvern's cries, and you're like, what the heck? What the heck is that
Yeah.
noise? You
Exactly.
know?
Yeah. I was
So
really blown away. I think I know what you're talking about. I've looked through Tonisberg, and I think people might be surprised. They'll be like, "Where's the game?" Especially when you compare it to old school Renaissance modules.
right.
Which if you look at those, they will be densely packed, and they will tell you, "Hey, here's 2 paragraphs in bullet form command panel layout of things going on," and it will present an interesting situation. Whereas in Tonisberg, it will, like you said, it'll just say whatever 8x orcs or whatever, and it might be look like a blank room. And another example of this I saw is when I looked at the supplement for Carcosa. And if you look at the map for Carcosa, it has a hex map and it'll say castle, 26x yellow men led by a superhero. And that's it. And it won't say anything else. And you'd say, how am I supposed to run a game this way? But this is exactly the inversion that I think we stand to benefit from as old school Renaissance people, to say, get rid of, never mind command panel stuff with bullet points, get rid of all of it, and the game engine is apophenia. You read Appendix N, and you don't prepare stuff, and you know the big picture, and from the big picture you naturally convey, why would there be 8 orcs in this room? And and whatever that insane thing is that comes out is the truth. And you convey that and leave it alone, and then the players drive what happens with that. I think that is it's.
Yeah. I mean, everyone really needs to get, module B1 in Search of the, sit down with it and run it for their table.
Oh, really?
Because it's have you seen it?
I ran
It's
it.
blank. It's blank. You have to fill in everything yourself. Or not everything, but a big chunk of it you fill in yourself. And so and there's no box text. You know what I mean? I think box text was the ruination of adventure design. Because then, I mean, even as a kid, I thought I had to make all this box text for every dungeon I was going to lay out. Write all this stuff. And what if this is where the idea of zero prep, that people say, oh, well, what if you prep all this stuff and no one shows up? What if they don't go there? Because they're thinking about, what if you prep 30 rooms worth of box text? You've just written 6,000 words and they don't ever go to that dungeon. Well, you know what? I didn't write 6,000 words. I have a 30-room dungeon with 30 bullet points.
Yeah, a single bullet point. Yeah.
It took me 2 hours, but I draw fancy maps. I like fancy maps. You know what I mean? I draw them for myself. But can I do something that's just a sketch? That's just a napkin sketch? Yes, I can. Absolutely. If I have to, I will. But I don't like to, because I like drawing pretty maps.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they'll get notes, and I'll draw on the map, where there's water, where there's smoke, so that so I can look at the map and say, okay, you can start to smell smoke now, or you start to smell ammonia now, which in my old campaign, in the World of Pain, when they smelled ammonia, that meant that there were grave rats. And grave rats were 8-legged, like centipede rats, and they were super vicious. They had 7 hit points. They were really tough. And if they bit you, they had 3 times the normal chance of a rat to cause a disease. And my players were absolutely terrified. They were always found in rubble. If you saw a pile of rubble, there were in it. And if you smelled ammonia, that meant that there were grave rats nearby, and you were close to what we called the below dark, which meant that there was probably a spawning site, like a literal orifice in the wall that was like a meat wall. And monsters would be
I do
birthed
that.
out of
That happens in Otherworld. We have meat walls, and they come out of
and that was part of the phenomenology of the world.
Yeah.
And into the underworld, there was going to be, like, literally a birthing orifice where increasingly more dangerous monsters would be birthed out of this hole.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so if you saw grave rats, then you knew that various other types of creatures, like white cobras, were not far behind. Because the dungeon would start to birth creatures to fight you, because the dungeon was inimical to your presence.
Yeah.
It knew you were there and it didn't want you. And it would birth more monsters to force you out. So the longer you jerked around, exploring the dungeon, or doing whatever, the more monsters you were going to have to face. I mean, there were some of the early dungeons, they got chased out because there were so many monsters being born. So their goal became, okay, let's go in there, let's find the orifice and kill it, and then we can explore the dungeon.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think I don't know. I think I've arrived at my hypothesis based on our talking it out. I've decided. Now, obviously, I mean, look, I think it's common sense, but for folks that you just get together and you play a one-page RPG, which I love, like Honey Heist or something, or you're playing Morkborg or something, and you do it in an evening, you don't do it again for 6 months, and this is a fun thing you do. Yeah, I mean, obviously, but most old school Renaissance people are making worlds, and if you're making a world, I think you need to do this. I think you need to have a wargaming mode, and I'm
Yep,
there.
you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your player.
So, Stephen, is there anything else coming up on your channel or your blog? Now, listen, of note, this will happen about 6 months from now, but I just want to ask if there's something coming up. I
Well,
will.
this is August of 25, and right now I am working on a follow-up to the Wargame Paradigms, and it's going to be the faction paradigm. And in order to generate the material and playtest the ideas, I am running a solo campaign using bits and pieces from Castle Grief's Cal Aerith. I am using For Against Darkness.
That's a great blog too, Castle Grief.
I am using Axebane's Deck of Many Dungeons for generating dungeons for solo play. And I'm using Hellfire Campaigns by Jim Webster. The Men Who Would Be King structure that he's got, the campaign structure to generate factions that are vying against each other on a large scale map. And that is going to create the rules and procedures that we need for teaching people how to do faction play if they've never done it before.
Yeah, that would be, oh my gosh, that would be so helpful. Like, and it needs to not assume any knowledge, because I think this faction play, I'm gonna call it a mode. I'm gonna actually say that's a distinct mode, almost kind of like diplomacy on it. Is if you're playing 5e, you should be doing this, in my opinion. I see very little downside to saying, hey, will you take the coolest, worst monster in my campaign and just pretend to be it? Like, first of all, your friends are gonna be like, I get to be this like badass, insane, disgusting thing, and I get to just be as mean as possible. Your friends are probably going to want to do it, actually, to be honest with you. And second,
Right.
It's very relaxing. It can be done very stately. So if you have that friend, and everybody has these friends, you got the friend who's just had kids and they don't have any time, this is the thing for that friend to do. And this allows everybody to participate. It's so ironic that people convey this whole thing as inaccessible or gatekeepy, and the funny thing is it's literally the opposite. This is literally the way of doing this, where everyone could participate and it's accessible. It's mind-blowing. But I think everybody, I almost can't think of, if you are doing campaigns and not just one-shots, it seems to me everybody should be doing a patron level of mode. I don't know.
It's super exciting. It's super exciting. And I mean, I've been a patron in a couple campaigns because you don't have to do a lot of stuff. You know what I mean?
Exactly. You're just the
turn in your
CEO.
stuff
You just
every
like
week,
say, hey,
you know what I mean? And I mean, there was one small campaign that it was run. I think it was run on an 8-session experimental basis, and one of the characters came to me and asked for something, and I told him what it was going to cost. He never came back.
yeah, that
But
can
it was, I
happen.
mean, it was
Yeah.
fun, and I generated this thing and just turned it loose.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Stephen, I'm going to put a link to Wargame Culture Design Journal and also your YouTube channel in the comments, and then, or I mean, in the description. And I really appreciate you chatting with me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's been super fun. I had a great time.
Mythic Mountains RPG is a private online play club that focuses on folk RPGs. Folk RPGs are the games that belong to all of us. They're what actually happens at a table between friends. It's their voice that has the authority on what is fun and what works for them. Weekly, we upload our games to allow others to sit in with us. The channel isn't monetized. We don't own the artwork, music, software, or games shown in these actual plays, and you can find links to their authors in the description. Like, subscribe, and share if you wish, or don't. Just like games in person, you're welcome to pull up a chair, sit in, and watch some of our games. No performances, no fancy equipment, just regular people playing folk pencil and paper role-playing games and having a good time. We hope these games will prove a source of enjoyment to anyone just wanting to listen in, anyone looking for examples of how actual groups run and play folk RPGs, and most importantly, if you haven't found your group yet, you're welcome here at ours.